So my friends, we know that people do not like to sit down and watch long videos. So again, we're going to ask you, who is giving us the facts? Is it Premier Ford or is it Minister Thompson? Now, this is clearly showing that Premier Ford and his government do not know which numbers they are giving us is accurate. So in this video, you will see Premier Ford tells us about the purchase of masks from Primehead. Premier Ford will tell us that they purchase 50 million masks a year for 5 years. That's 250 million masks. Minister Thompson will tell us that they purchase 50 million masks over 5 years. That is a discrepancy of 200 million masks between the Premier of Ontario's announcement and the Premier's minister, Mrs. Thompson. On another note, the Premier will tell us that it will create 50 new full-time jobs. Minister Thompson will tell us it creates up to 250 jobs. How can you have a minister in the Ontario government who is supposed to be responsible and accountable to the people and the Premier be off 200 million in the amount of masks that were purchased from Primehead, and how can they be off 200 in the amount of jobs it will create? So here is Premier Ford's statement, and he will tell you he is excited. Listen clearly.
In fact, I'm excited to announce today we have signed a contract with Primehead to produce 50 million surgical masks a year over the next 5 years.
50 million surgical masks a year over the next 5 years. So does not 50 million times 5 equals 250 million?
Primehead has chosen Ontario to set up a new major medical manufacturing facility in Cambridge. So congratulations, Cambridge. This investment will create 50 new good-paying jobs.
50 new good-paying jobs. So now the Premier is going to go into a small business announcement. We're going to forward this tape to Minister Thompson. Let's get Minister Thompson on and see
restrictions or
see what Minister
this fully operational.
This is
Primehead will produce.
This is Minister Thompson. Minister Thompson will now tell you how much mask Primehead will produce. Premier Ford just told you Primehead will produce 50 million masks a year. For the next 5 years, 250 million masks. Premier Ford just told you it will create 50 new full-time jobs. Let's hear what Minister Thompson tells us.
50 million of the level 1 and level 2 surgical masks we need to combat COVID-19. This will happen in a brand new facility that, when fully operational, will employ upwards of 250 people producing.
Did you hear Minister Thompson? Let's go back to Minister Thompson. Premier Ford.
A province starting down the road to recovery in the best place in the world for businesses to invest and grow and thrive. Thank you. And God bless.
We hear nothing about the virus and the spread of the virus from Premier Ford. So here is Minister Thompson. We're going to listen to her and hear what she has to say.
Primehead has been an invaluable partner throughout the pandemic, and I am very pleased that we are taking this partnership to the next level. Over the next 5 years.
Over the next 5 years. Did you hear? Over the next 5 years. Let's hear how much mask Minister Thompson tells us that Primehead will deliver. The Premier told us 50 million over 5 years, 250 million. The Premier told us 50 new jobs will be created. Here is Minister Thompson telling us how much will be created.
Primehead will produce 50 million of the level 1 and level 2.
Let's go back
surgical
again.
masks.
Here comes Minister Thompson. Here's what she says. Over.
Thank you, Premier. Primehead has been an invaluable partner throughout the pandemic, and I am very pleased that we are taking this partnership to the next level. Over the next 5 years, Primehead will produce 50 million of the level 1.
Over the next 5 years, Primehead will produce 50 million of the level 1 mask. So Premier Thompson's numbers is 50 million masks over 5 years. Premier Ford's numbers says 250 million masks over 5 years. How can the Premier and the Minister be off by 200 million in their numbers? Here is the jobs numbers from Lisa Thompson. Premier Ford says it will create 50 new full-time jobs. How many does Minister Thompson say?
And level 2 surgical masks we need to combat COVID-19. This will happen in a brand new facility that, when fully operational, will employ upwards of 250 people producing surgical masks.
So Minister Thompson tells us that this contract that was signed by the government of Ontario will produce 50 million masks over 5 years and will create up to 250 jobs. Premier Ford, the beady eyes, Premier Ford tells us that it will be 50 million a year for 5 years, and it will create 50 jobs. Ontarians, if this does not concern you, that your Premier of Ontario and their minister, who's from the same government as the Premier, will be off by 200 million in the purchase of bulk surgical mask, and they will be off by 200 apart when it comes to the jobs. We need to hear from Ms. Thompson, and we need to hear from Mr. Ford. How could you each be so off in your numbers? I'm Kevin Clark. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Ontario People's Political Party and your candidate for Toronto Mayor. And I only serve one, you, the people.